Welcome everyone to Kerbal Space Program, better than ever. Now, there was a bit of a disaster last week. One of our many commercial missions failed. As a result, all Kerbals have been grounded. Fortunately, Jeb got out alive, unscathed, and he was able to negotiate a few deals. Because of course, where there is disaster, there is also opportunity. In this case, Infernal Robotics have supplied us with a range of parts which may come in very handy for rovers and other automated vehicles. We've also been able to get hold of KOS, a very experimental device that will allow us to automate some of our more experimental vehicles. And of course, we couldn't do without RemoteTech, which will allow us to send our very experimental vehicles to very experimental locations. So with that said, let's do a little bit of spending. Now we've managed to accumulate 1 million funds, and that's plenty enough to upgrade our research and development facilities. Now it's going to take just over 750,000 funds, and for that we will get research science limit up to 500, which means we will be able to purchase new things in the science centre. We will be able to transfer resources between parts of our vehicles, although transferring Kerbals will be a little difficult if they are grounded. But in order to get EVAs and surface samples, we will need to upgrade the astronaut complex, but one thing at a time. So let's upgrade our science centre, so the building works completed rather promptly. But let's now spend some of our 245 science in that new complex. The new expanded science complex has now given us additional layers. We have heavy rocketry for 160 science, that's the very large mainsail engine, the famous jumbo orange tank, and one of the London Fire Brigade booster rockets. We also get specialised construction, and I like specialised construction because it contains docking ports, which always makes for fun building. Actuators, not much in the actuators. It is in fact the grabbing unit. Now this is a universal grabbing unit. It can grab ships or asteroids, making it a very useful part for collecting space junk. Supersonic flight contains some additional aeroplane parts. We're not very much into aeroplanes, but we will cross that bridge when we come to it. We have specialised control, which contains the larger reaction wheel and also the larger command pod. So those will come in very handy. We will also get this cylindrified monopropellant tank. Now we haven't used much monopropellant because we haven't done much docking, but that can be a very useful component, as can be the larger parachute. Next, under precision engineering, we get some smaller parts. So we get, for example, this tiny liquid engine. We get this round 8 toroidal fuel tank. So these will make some very good parts for satellites, for example. So there's the Probodyne Hex body. So that's a very handy body for small satellites. Now in advanced electrics, we now finally get some of these compact photovoltaic panels that will actually pack away into a little box and then extend on demand. And we also get this larger rechargeable battery. So I think we're going to be making use of these photovoltaic panels on our new satellites, but we will see that shortly. Under advanced exploration, apparently ladders are advanced. So yeah, we may need some of those if we intend landing anywhere, but of course without EVAs might prove a little difficult. But we do get the press mat barometer, a science device, and the more science the better. And finally, advanced landing includes these heavy duty landing legs and another large parachute. So what should we go for with our 245 science? Well, Given that we're going to be using electrics quite a lot on our satellites, I think we should go for our photovoltaic panels. So let's spend our research, spend 20,000 funds purchasing those parts from the manufacturer, and now we're kind of stuck. 85 science, we can't unlock any of these other parts, so I think we need to start dealing with our contracts for satellites, don't you think? I'll see you there. Now, as far as satellite contracts go, they don't get much easier than this. It's an equatorial orbit for our satellite. It must be obviously an unmanned probe to be a satellite. We're given these particular orbital specifics. So 12 million meters for apoapsis and periapsis. Because it's equatorial, it's 0 degrees. Now, watch this carefully. If it's 180 degrees, it's a retrograde orbit. So be very careful with this particular property. Now, of course, we need to launch this unmanned probe. It must have power and an antenna. We'll come back to the antenna bit in a moment. It must be an equatorial orbit, well, we knew that, within a reasonable deviation. It doesn't actually tell you what reasonable is, but eyeballing it is usually good enough. Having met that orbit, we need to hands off the controls for 10 seconds. Now we'll get 16,000 funds in advance. On completion, we will get almost 86,000 funds back. And notice the modifiers on our science, and in this case on our reputation. I've changed our strategy so we get more reputation, better contracts, because I decided we could sacrifice science for reputation and get more funds back in the long term than simply turning science into funds. So let's go and check out exactly what that strategy is. First of all, we'll accept that contract, and then we'll head on over and check out the strategy. Now, previously we had been licensing our patents, which was taking science and turning it into funds. But instead I decided that open source tech program that took science and turned it into reputation would be a much better idea. Better contracts yield more funds, and that was probably more profitable than just selling our science. So let's see how that goes now that we have a fair bit of reputation, and just see how the quality of our contracts improves. But we have a contract to put a satellite into an equatorial orbit, so of course let's launch that. I'll see you in the VAB. Here we are in the familiar VAB, and I think we'll begin by building a sub-assembly satellite. We'll be able to use that then in future missions regardless of shape and size of said mission. Now we'll begin with this octagonal body, octagonal body, because it has flat surfaces, and I find that a heck of a lot easier to stick stuff to than the curved surfaces of the rather more attractive Stay Putnik. But I like sticking stuff to flat surfaces, so we will keep with that. Next I will add a reaction wheel to make it a little bit easier to maneuver. Satellites have two basic requirements. They have antenna, which we will come back to, and those antenna need power. So power is batteries and solar panels. So let's get a body of batteries. So let's make out a body of batteries. So let's duplicate these parts until we have a nice body of batteries. That should be plenty. We'll need a fuel tank to maneuver the satellite in space, and then we'll take one of these small Rockomax engines just to do the maneuvering itself. Now we will go for antenna next, and the reason is I just want to space the antenna out and then fit the solar panels around them. So we'll do the antenna next. Now the antenna come from the RemoteTech pack, and Gruntworks does an excellent tutorial on how to use RemoteTech. The basic principles are very simple. every satellite has an antenna has range. And each of the satellites with said antenna must be able to communicate with another satellite, which communicates with another satellite, which ultimately leaves you with a chain of links back to mission control. If that chain is broken because satellites go out of range or they run out of power, you can't send commands to your satellite. So let's have a quick look at some of the antenna we have available to us right now. The first is the Reflectron DB10. This is an omnidirectional antenna and it's indestructible in the atmosphere. Now I'm just going to slip one on. Let's use our flat surface, shall we? Let's put our flat surface to good use and just try and fit that, there we go, centrally. Now the advantage of the TP10 is that it is always activated by default. It has a relatively short range of 500 kilometers, but it is, as I say, indestructible in the atmosphere, which means this is an ideal antenna to use to communicate back to mission control as part of the ascent into orbit. Next in power and in range is the Communitron. Again, this is omnidirectional. Now, omnidirectional means it will communicate with any other satellite that happens to be in range with a similar antenna. So this is ideal for communicating with other satellites in the same orbit. Now let's just move that one around here. No particularly good reason, but let's put our Kerbal engineering system on this flat surface like so, as we usually do on that side. Let's just, because I'm very picky, move that up centrally. So those are two sets of omnidirectional antenna. This one will be used to communicate with mission control. Yes, near enough central. I am very picky. Let's just move it across very slightly. There we go. Don't know that's made it any different, but there we are. And this Communicron 16 will allow us to communicate with... let's get the Communicron 16 and deploy it. This will allow us to communicate with other satellites around Kerbin. Now, one of the very important things to note, as I mentioned, is if your satellite goes out of range or simply out of line of sight with other satellites that have a link back to mission control, or indeed this satellite does not have a link back to mission control, you can't even extend your Communitrons. Be warned. Make sure you extend your Communitrons as soon as you're out of the atmosphere, just to be absolutely sure. Next up is the Comms DTS M1. Now I'm going to place 4 of these lovely devices on our satellite. Now the reason I'm selecting 4 is these are unidirectional. In other words, they point at one specific target. Now in the Kerbin system we only have 3 bodies to be pointed at. We have Kerbin, we have Minmus, and we have the Mun. But we also have one special body, and that is the active vessel, which means whichever vessel is currently the one you are using, this satellite and other satellites wouldn't then be able to control. So we need 4 of these satellites, which have the bonus of having much greater range. These are 50 million meters, which is plenty enough to get around the Kerbin system. Finally, we have, given the science we've unlocked, the Reflectron KR7. This is very powerful. Again, it is unidirectional, and it will get out to 90 million meters. Now, you'll notice it's not one of the extending style antenna, and so it is also indestructible in the atmosphere. The ones that extend are destructible, so make sure you don't extend them whilst you are still extending, while you are still ascending through the atmosphere. Unfortunately, as I said, all of these antennae use power, and this is the reason we have so many batteries. Once you deploy your antenna, and of course, as we remember, this one is always considered deployed, you start consuming power, hence the large number of batteries. But of course, to compensate for a large number of batteries, we are going to put on some photovoltaic panels. So let's cram in 4 of these. Maybe we'll go for the slightly smaller ones. Here we go. Let's go for these slightly smaller, slightly cheaper panels. We'll be able to cram a few more of them in. Not that one. We'll go to the... where we go. Let's have a look. So you can squeeze that one in. Another one in there. I don't think we are going to be able to. So let's see if we can put them equally spaced around. Yeah, I think that should be fine. If we let's have a look. Can we get in there? No, we can't extend them in the VAB, so we can't see if they will interfere with our larger antenna. Let's just start deployed. I think we should be just about fine the way they are. I don't think they will interfere, so that's good. Let's start retracted, so let's put that away. Now, of course, we can't do without, or cannot do without, photovoltaic panels. And again, in a rather similar fashion to the antenna, if you don't have power, you can't extend any of your other panels. So having a few of these on your satellite is always a good idea. Now, also one of the good ideas, something I have found during practice, if you do not have these extending and rotating compact panels, you can find yourself with all of your single panels. You can actually do it, just plaster your vehicle with these single panels, but of course, if you end on to the sun, the panels won't actually be recharging. So that could prove a significant problem. So bear that in mind if you are trying to put up RemoteTech satellites with just these single voltaic panels, which again is a reason why having flat surfaces is good. But obviously earlier in the game you only have the Stay Pupnik, so try and get a panel right on the top and potentially have some panels around the bottom as well to try and get as many panels pointing in as many directions as you can, because just a trickle of power should be enough to at least recharge your batteries over a number of orbits. So we have our omnidirectional aerials, one with a short range for going back to mission control, one with a longer range to get us back to other satellites, or if we are near-ish mission control, this one will do as well. And then we have our medium range unidirectional extendable antenna, which we can use to get back to Kerbin, to cover Minmus, to cover the Mun, and to cover our special target, our active vessel. So let's call this our short range ComSat can't spell, ComSat Mark 1. Let's save that. One quick reload later finds us back in the familiar VAB with our satellite. Now we'd like to use this as a sub-assembly so that we can attach this satellite to multiple different types of launch vehicle depending on our contract. So let's drop this on the sub-assembly zone. Let's give it a name. We will call it short range short range ComSat Mark 1, and we will save that. Now let us imagine we are going to build ourselves a new vehicle, so let's clear out the VAB and see what our little tricky attachment problem is. Now a common thing you might want to do is actually to launch multiple satellites simultaneously. So let's go to the structural section, get ourselves a tri-coupler, and just attach that on the top there. Now you'll notice that this is not a very functional launch vehicle, but it will do for the test we're about to do. Let's go to the Subassembly tab and pick our rather aptly named ComSat-1 and try and attach it by the engine, which is what you imagine you might want to do when launching. That doesn't work, so okay, let's go back to the structural parts. Let's get a decoupler. Let's try 3 decouplers and see, will that work? No, that doesn't work either. Now notice, if you will, there's only one attachment point and it's on the root part, which cunningly we've put an omnidirectional sensor over the top. So we're a bit stuck. We can't really attach this in any way, shape or form. But this is where our new little gizmos come in, particularly this root gizmo. So let's go back to our satellite and see how we can change the root part. So how do we solve the problem of the root part? Well, this is where the root part gizmo comes in. This allows you to change which root part on your vehicle you want to nominate as the root part. Now we know which root part because that's the first part you add, and it's also the bit you grab in order to move your vehicle around. And you'll also notice as we've covered up our root part connection globe, which you can see there at the top. So how would you change this? Well, select the root gizmo, select the set of parts that you want to be the root part or contains the root part, and then in this case we're going to click the engine and that becomes our root part. And notice the little green attachment globe is now present. This means that whenever we attach this vessel, it will attach by the engine and not by the probe. Handy, huh? This now means we can go to our subassembly section. We can grab by the engine, drop it on the subassembly zone. We can give it a name, short range ComSat Mark 1. We can save that. And now we will be able to attach this as a subassembly using this node. So let's see how to do that by building a simple launch vessel to launch a single copy of this satellite to complete our first mission. Now launching our satellite is going to be relatively straightforward. We're again going to start off with one of these basic bodies. We will again get ourselves a command and control section. So we'll get a wheel, an inline reaction wheel. And then I think, well, we just really need a basic launcher. So let us put on a couple of tanks. Get ourselves a basic engine, which one we'll have the LVT-30 as usual. We will also put on our science. There we go, our Kerbal engineering system. That will just give us our readouts. That will allow us to know how much delta V we have. And there we go, our delta V, nice substantial 5,328 delta V in this section. Not very much useful on this section because we actually want to launch ourselves our craft. So let's get on. We don't need one quite that big. We just need a stack decoupler, and now we need our subassembly. So we'll take our ComSat and we will stick it on top. Perfect. So we do have 2 bodies. We do have 2 probe bodies. That's fine because we want to control from this main probe body here. Now we're going to use this omnidirectional antenna to make our connection back to the launch pad, back to mission control throughout our mission. But I do think that we will want to deorbit this section at the end of our launch. So I suggest we have another pair of, where are we? Another pair of our antenna just squeezed in here. Let's rotate that, and what side we have on? Just put our, here we go, Communitron in here. Now we should also have some batteries. Don't have any batteries on this master section at all, this launch section. I don't want it to run out of power before we've deorbited it, so let's just squeeze a battery in there. We won't bother trying to recharge it, that's probably unnecessary. We'll get ourselves launch stability enhancers. That should be fine. Bring it down a little towards the pad. There we go. And I think we are good to go. We have our launch vehicle that's got plenty of delta V, but we've got to make sure we have our stability enhancers in the right section. That would help. And have we got the right engine? And we've got the wrong engine in that section, so let's make sure we rotate those round. So 4,200, not quite enough to get us into our orbit, our stable orbit. So let's do what we usually do, which is a little bit of asparagus staging. So let's get our fuel line here. Get that going centrally. Get our engine LVT 30. Oh, not one of those, one of these. Squeeze that in there. Now we just need to make sure we swap these over. Put these into the launch section. Squeeze this in here. That gets us to 5,770. That should be enough to reach our goal. So let's not over-engineer the solution. Let's get a couple of struts in there like so. Perhaps we will stabilize our satellite with some additional struts like so, just to be absolutely sure. I think we are just fine there. So I think we are ready to go. So let's put this as our sat launch Mark 1. That will do. Satellite launcher Mark 1. Let's save that and head on out to the launch pad and launch our first satellite, and let us see what kind of difficulties this single satellite launch may pose.